receiving content. And I'm live. Look at that shit. Live chat. All right, here we go. So, yeah, the fucking, what do you call it, kind of trips me out a little bit. The delay, I always have to get used to that when I do this shit. So, also the record feels just a wee bit loud, so bear with me. All right, there we go. Gotta have music though, you know, otherwise it's just bullshit. So, yeah, we can talk about whatever baloney tonight. I don't really have a whole lot to show. I mean, I kind of do, but I kind of don't too. So, but yeah, I think I'll talk about a few jazz books in a couple minutes, and maybe go on a little bit of a tirade, maybe not. But I was looking at some of these like jazz lists the other day because I'm kind of interested in like revisiting some of the old guys. You know, it's funny. Ever since I pulled up those Don Martin records the other day, hey Mick, thanks for joining, man. You're the first one, so right on. Yeah, ever since pulling out those Don Martin covers the other day, since those are like really kind of old sounding jazz records, I've been playing those again and just kind of like enjoying that sound. And you know, Birth of the Cool too, right? Talked about that one a few days ago too. So I've been thinking maybe it'd be a good time to revisit some of the earlier guys, you know, like the Duke Ellington and shit like that, where I never really connected with them in the past, you know. It's like, if I listen to Duke Ellington, it's fine, you know, but it's never really ripped my face off, you know. So I was looking through some of these lists, you know, online. I mean, like, seriously, like you Google greatest jazz albums and see what comes up, you know. And there were two things that struck me. First of all, is how fucking sick to death I got of seeing Kinda Blue, A Love Supreme, and a couple of these other super basic records where, I mean, they belong on those lists, okay? I guess the one that got me was when I was like, here's some great jazz records to check out if you're new to jazz, you know? And I feel like I'm on a one-man crusade to like fight that. Because I think Kind of Blue is a terrible record to give to someone who's just interested in getting into jazz for the first time, but doesn't have any experience with it. You know what I mean? Because it sounds like such a fully realized jazz album that if you don't already get jazz, you don't already dig jazz, there's really nothing to sink your teeth into, you know? When, one thing I've talked about before is how I'd sort of gotten to a place in my life where, so pretentious to put it quite so strongly, but I got into a place where I'd given up on getting my head around jazz ever. You know, I was like, when I was about 30, 31, 32, I had a few jazz records, like maybe between 20 and 50 that I'd sort of been carrying around, and every once in a while I'd bust them out, and every time I couldn't really relate to them, so I was just like, you know, I mean, I always liked the Coltrane records, okay? I was like, this is bullshit, and one of the records in that stack was Kinda Blue, you know? I had listened to that record several times, but it just didn't do anything for me, you know what I mean? I was a rock and roller, and that's where I was coming from, and it just didn't make that connection, you know? And part of why I talk about Mingus so much, and Blues and Roots specifically, is because the very first track on that record, Wednesday Night Prayer Meeting, really kind of changed that for me. That like broke right through it, you know, just all the parts going on in there, the chaos of it, but all coming into this very coherent whole. Hey, Thumpfinger, dude. Yeah, we are talking Mingus. I'd like talking about Mingus. Guess what? I'm going to start talking about Sun Ra in a minute, too. You know, when someone asked me someone just asked me a few days ago, what's one record for me to check out, a jazz record? And I didn't even have to think about it that much. I was like, Blues and Roots, man. I equivocated a little bit more than that. I was like, okay, well, here are a few things that you absolutely need to hear, okay? But if you're going to quarter me on one, it's Blues and Roots. And it's funny because I've gotten like stronger in this, but that was the record. That was the door for me. That was the door when I opened it up, and it was, you know what it was like for me? It was like when Dorothy like goes into Wonderland and like the original Alice in it's not Alice in Wonderland. Fucking what do I think of? The Wizard of Oz. When she gets to Oz and all it switches from black and white into color. That's what blues and roots was for me. Prior to that, jazz was black and white, and all of a sudden it was in color for me. You know what I mean? It just like opened it up, and it was like, wow, this whole universe of just awesomeness that I've just enjoyed so much. So anyway, so if I'm talking with someone now, it's like a pretty close, really, between that one and Mingus but Blues and Roots is the one that I personally owe a debt of gratitude towards. So when I see Kind of Blue and A Love Supreme at the top of these lists, and Take Five, dude, Take Five is a boring ass record if you're not like there, you know. I have a copy here. I was going to show my copy the other day, or today. What am I saying the other day? Here it is. I just played this. In fact, I played it twice. I love this record. Okay, I really do. But until I got enough into jazz that I could appreciate the idioms of jazz, I couldn't appreciate how different this was from other jazz. You know what I mean? And how important and kind of groundbreaking this record was, you know? And without that, it's just kind of some dude playing the piano. Yeah, the time signatures are kind of weird, but it doesn't really do all that much because the whole thing is just so soft and so smooth. It just sort of like goes right over you like a gentle breeze, and it doesn't really, you know, change your life. Blue Rondo a la Turk, I think, is one of the greatest fucking things ever. And that's not exactly an obscure tune off this record. Yeah, Brubeck's fucking great, man. I used to say mean things about him before I got my head around it. So the thing that pisses me off about these lists that I was looking at, like top 100 records, some of these, and I'd go through them, right? And there's one Sun Ra record in there. And it looks like a token, too. You know what I mean? It's generally this one. Which in a way is a good choice. I mean, this has Enlightenment on it, and Saturn, An Ancient Ethiopia, all classic, you know, sort of cornerstones of the Sun Ra oeuvre. But if you want to listen to why Sun Ra is important, this one kind of scratches the surface. You know, you listen to like Live at the Gibbous in that French live record, and that's just mind-blowing, that record, you know. I mean, that falls in the same genre as a record like Take Five. It's just incredible. This one very much sounds like jazz, and again, when I was okay, I don't see this at the top of other people's lists of like you know, records for people who are just kind of starting to dip their toe in the water of jazz, right? Not like those other ones I was already talking about. But same deal. If I'm going to say here, get one Sun Ra record, unless like you're really into 50s jazz, in which case this will sound revolutionary because it fucking was. That's not the one I'm going to say. I'm going to pick one from the 70s. It's a little more electronic, a little closer to what some of the prog rock guys were doing, a little closer to some of the electronic experimentation that was going on by groups like Kraftwerk and shit like that, sort of in their area. And so you can sort of hear that crossover and assimilate the jazz sort of through that portal, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, I've done like one or two editions of like 5 jazz records for people who are interested in checking it out. I might do another one of these days too, because it's funny. In a way, I feel a little bit inspired, but it's like, I don't know, man. I mean, I could make a fucking video on the top 100 Sun Ra records. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit maybe, but a top 50 I could totally do. And like, to see a top 100 and there's bullshit on there like Wynton Marsalis, and then one token Sun Ra record that's like that one, or worse yet, Sun Song. It's like, dude, you didn't even listen to these fucking records, first of all. But second of all, I was waiting for someone to ask me what was playing, Joel. Thanks for joining, and thanks for, you get the 10 points, because I'm actually looking forward to talking about that. Just to finish the thought, though, man, if you're making a top 100 list and you're putting Wynton Marsalis in there, who's just a fucking hack who didn't really bring anything new. I mean, he's a good player, you know what I mean? But it's like, he doesn't like being called Reagan era jazz, but I'm sorry, that's what that shit was. It was very conservative at a time when in a lot of areas in the culture, people were reacting against the 60s and 70s. So it is Reagan era jazz. So if you have one of those and one Sun Ra record, there's something seriously fucked up about your taste in jazz. I don't care what anyone says, and I don't care if it's some fucking expert. So, although ironically, we're going to talk about some jazz books in a minute. So, yeah, this is the other one. I just played this the other day. And again, this is an early one, man. This is one of the early Christian. Right on, man. So Christian's great-grandfather wrote 4 editions to the Index to Jazz by Orrin Blackstone. I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with that, but that's still fucking awesome. You know what I just found out? I just figured out a couple days ago was my congressman. We still have I put a new congressman in 2018. Joe Cunningham is his name. And it turns out I met his dad. His dad was a judge in Kentucky. And he was down here a couple of years ago, and he visited my lodge. And so I met the dude. It's not like we're tight or anything, right? But I didn't make the connection until a couple of days ago when Spencer was looking at writing a letter to his congressman because for reasons that are funny, beside the point. So I went and just sort of looked to sort of figure out a little bit about who the guy was and shit, and like on Wikipedia or something really slight like that. But I ended up sort of putting the piece together and going, holy shit, I met this fucking guy's dad. So. All right, Joel, I am glad you asked what's playing because it is this fucking gem of a record that I just got today. Special order from a local place, but it's all over the place online, okay? And that cover is really kind of bullshit, but this is Nick Ingman's Big Beat. And this is on Modern Harmonic, and apparently it's some sort of obscure-ass library. Fuck. My hype stickers, I always save these, right? There's some obscure-ass, library record. And, it's supposed to be background for film, television, and radio, okay? But it never happened, and this is just sort of out there, and originals you can pretty much forget about finding. So what year is it? Let's see, 2018 Modern Harmonic. Originally issued in 1973, and there's a catalog number. So yeah, I'll tell you something, man. I special ordered this a few days ago because I went looking for it at the store because they have Modern Harmonic stuff. There wasn't one in. I wasn't surprised. I was like, I know they have a connection. I don't try not to send them looking for anything obscure, right? I always save hype stickers, some figure, unless they're bullshit, But oh yeah, so when I was there, man, I was like, dude, I walked in the door. I was like, so you should have a record for me, right? And the dude pulled it out. I was like, man, okay, let me tell you something. You should listen to that fucking record because it's great. He obviously didn't know it. So they ended up putting it on. All of the people in the store were like, fuck. I was like, yeah, right on, man. That's how I roll, fucking proselytizing. I don't know this Heat. I know the name, Jonathan, but I have never listened to anything. Incidentally, this record claims to be orchestral inventions featuring unusual instrumentation. And that's pretty true. Chemical Reaction, right on, man. Thanks for joining. It's pretty true. I don't know if it's coming through very much, but there's a lot of weird synth on here and shit. And there's a lot of jawbone and shit like that in there too. So just a fucking cool record, man, across the board. So yeah, 2 thumbs up, man. I strongly recommend it. So what else is new? What do you want to talk about? Want to talk about some jazz books? All right, let's do it. Because I'll tell you, I actually have a lot more than I realized. So the first jazz book that I want to recommend is Miles Davis's autobiography. I think it's just called Miles. And I know for a fact that I had a copy, and I know for a fact that I didn't lose it in a move, just because I specifically remember the toilet I was sitting on when I read about half of it. So, yeah, I must have let someone borrow that book, though. I'd never gotten it back, which is what happens with some of my favorite books sometimes. So I personally need to grab another copy of that, because that's just a book I want to have in my library, right? I mean, Miles definitely comes off like a fucking dick in that book. You know what I mean? He brags about how he kicked heroin, and then when he talks about how he was doing coke in the 70s, you read it and you think you fell like right down that same hole that you fell down in the 50s. You know what I mean? I mean, some of the stories, like the whole story about him like teaching or wanting Jackie McLean to learn the song Yesterdays. And Jackie was like, I don't want to learn that cornball fucking shit or whatever. So on the stage one night, Miles put him up in front and said, hey, and for our next selection, we're going to do Yesterdays. And it's going to be we're going to feature on this song. We're going to feature our alto player, Jackie McLean. So that kind of humiliated him into having to learn the song then, after he made an ass out of himself that first night. Shit like that. Turntablist, man. Welcome, dude. Been a while since I've seen you on one of these. Happy to have you. Anyway, though, but the thing is, Miles, I mean, it's true that Miles worked with everyone, you know? I mean, no, it's not true. If you want stories about Albert Eiler, forget it. Miles didn't have anything to do with the guy. I didn't give a shit about it. I think it's pretty well known that Miles Davis didn't have a lot of use for any real free jazz. Even though the shit that he was doing in the 70s was pushing some serious boundaries in its own right, but in a totally different direction, you know? But that said, man, just sort of, it's a history of jazz by default, because Miles was kind of coming into his own in the 40s, and he was active through the 70s into the early 80s, you know what I mean? So all these sort of currents and trends that were going on, he had a part in. He drove a lot of them. And yeah, man, it's just a fucking great book, and it's a hilarious read, man, because the way he talks and the way it's transcribed, you know what I mean? Just little shit like him talking about going to the local fucking smokehouse in East St. Louis for snout sandwiches and shit like that. You gotta love it. So let me flip the record. Speaking of Miles, this is sort of an honorable mention because this is not really a jazz book. But the second Lester Bangs anthology, I guess. The first one being Psychotic Reaction and Carburetor Dung. Excuse me. Fucking drinking all the soda. It's making me burp a little bit. They're both definitely rock focused. But I kind of feel like the way, if you've read Psychotic Reaction and Carburetor Dung, the Lou Reed shit kind of forms a centerpiece of that book a little bit. And personally, I kind of feel like that's how the Miles Davis stories in this book work. So it's interesting because by the time I got this book, I was into jazz. The first book, no, but by the time I got this one, I was, and I was actually a lot more interested in Lester as a jazz writer because, you know, he was always a jazz fan and all over the free jazz shit and that sort of thing too from the get-go. So, you know, from shit like buying my own copy of Bird and Diz because I saw it in the background of a picture of Lester Bangs and shit, to, you know, spending a little more time with Tijuana Moods maybe when I got that one by Mingus than I might have otherwise, and noting certain specific things. Yeah, this is a Sir Thungle shirt. I did not see the movie or the film with Don Cheadle as Miles. What was that movie, actually? I don't even think I know about that. Yeah, I'm curious. Even if it's bad, I'm kind of curious, you know? Anyway, what Lester Bangs does in that book is, it's funny because I can relate to this because I do this kind of shit too. He like agonizes over the 70s shit because he's not connecting with it, you know what I mean? And like, he's like, why did I like one mainstream album after another by Miles Davis so much, but now that he's doing this like really groundbreaking shit, I fucking hate it, you know what I mean? Talking about a record like On the Corner, and then like the next story, he's like, On the Corner's fucking genius, man. Oh my god, and it's like that whole sort of process of like going back and forth on things and that. It's funny because I think I'm older than Lester Bangs was when he died, but I kind of feel like, minus the amphetamines, that there's certain sort of aesthetic proclivities we have in common. Maybe proclivities isn't the right word. It sounds a little bit sexual. All right, so that was an honorable mention. All right, so this is the one, The House the Train Built. Okay, this is basically about impulse. I was talking about Juice Newton. Yes, we've been talking. In fact, how long have I been live? 20 minutes. We just finished talking about Juice Newton, Tone. I'm sorry, man. You missed it. Yeah, sorry. It was a good talk, man. 20 minutes, just solid Juice Newton, man. About 5 minutes of it was just playing with the Queen of Hearts. But, yeah, dude. This was an interesting book, okay, in that, oh, dude, I fucking love Moxie, and Jay, thanks for coming, man. Yeah, Chemical, man, Moxie is the shit. That might be my favorite soda if I had to pick one. Now my favorite cola remains the Swamp Pop Noble King Cola. And I think my favorite root beer is the Virgil's, the one that comes in the big fucking jug. Not the one that that comes in the 4-packs, the regular 12-ounce bottles, but like the one that comes in the big jug with that fucking weird pop top and shit, because that's just a fucking tremendous one. But if I had to pick one soda, man, I think it might be Moxie. I have to think about that. But Moxie's like medicine, man. It's like, it just makes you feel like $1 million each sip. So anyway, Turntablist is saying, get the fuck back on track. Come on, cut the soda shit. All right, so this book, it feels like a book about jazz at a period when jazz was very well established, okay? Impulse was a label where, we don't necessarily talk about this in our circles as much. We'll talk about the look of Impulse and shit like that, but we don't talk about the fact that it's very clear that there was a lot of money behind Impulse, And, I suppose there's no sin in that, It's nice that was there, but that's kind of how this comes off. Is like Coltrane was already a very well-established seller, and so when he came in, they're pretty much willing to let him do whatever he wanted. And so he did. And then they also brought in some other guys, but it was also a place for guys like, say Ray Charles to come and make a record with a little bit more prestige than maybe what he was doing on Atlantic. You know what I mean? Like Genius plus Soul equals Jazz. I've never even heard that record, to be honest with you. But I think a record like that is as much about sort of, or was as much about sort of making... giving Ray Charles a little bit more of a respectable record than sort of his more pop records, That might just be me, but that's sort of my sense with this whole thing, you know what I mean? Creed Taylor, who kind of kicked this business off, was definitely like a businessman. And, Bob Thiele probably had a lot more to do with it overall than Creed Taylor, or anyone else for that matter, except maybe John Coltrane. But, this book didn't really inspire me to run out and get every single Impulse record I could get my hand on. It really kind of left me interested in the same ones that I was anyway. A lot of the shit with like the orchestra and the strings and a lot of the stuff they were doing feels a little bit cynical. especially in the context of, trying to make the money off of it. And, I don't want to like shit all over it because, I mean, it's obviously Impulse is an important label. And in a way, the Impulse look, the Impulse sort of seal of quality has brought a lot of people to jazz. It was one of the things that struck me when I found my very first Coltrane record. My very first Coltrane record that I really sat and spent time with was an Impulse. It was Ohm. I've kind of talked about this before. That's really kind of a funny one to get into because Coltrane wanted to leave that one in the vault himself. But I'm trying to go through and find some pictures of some of these here. I'm seeing 4 for Train and A Love Supreme and The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, and those are all like genuinely all-time classic records. And it's a little bit hard to imagine a record like The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady on a label other than Impulse in a way, But like this Johnny Hartman shit, there we go. That seems a little bit, I'm not going to say cynical because that would be way too harsh a word, but just more sort of looking in the direction of pop than what I like out of Coltrane, This Curtis Fuller one, I've seen that in the shop, but it's tempted me more than once, but it keeps me away. Orchestra arranged and conducted by Manny Album. I don't want to hear their fucking orchestra arranged and conducted by anyone. You know what I mean? I want to hear a jazz group. So anyway, this was very interesting. It gives some good insight into what was going on as Impulse developed. It gives a lot of insight into the decline of Impulse in the 70s. Like, by the time they started doing those, they did those Sun Ra reissues. I mean, Impulse was really on the way down. And you really kind of see after reading this how later on it was like they had more Coltrane shit in the vaults they were pulling out because those are going to be good sellers. But beyond that, they were really kind of trying really hard and kind of flailing. So yeah, and again, I'm still flipping through here and finding records I like Alice Coltrane, Universal Consciousness. That's a great record. There's a recent reissue on Superior Viaduct that you can probably find without too much trouble. Themby by Pharoah Sanders. It's probably my favorite Pharoah Sanders record, but... Yeah, but the shit's... It was going downhill. And the drop in quality you see in the 70s is really kind of... You understand it reading this, if that makes sense. All right, Tone, what's saying? To be honest, that Johnny Hartman Coltrane collaboration, I haven't listened to that record in years, honestly. I had it a long time ago. I haven't owned it in about 20 years. And, the people I've known who have been really into that Hartman Coltrane record have tended to be singers themselves. And yeah, it's interesting about the... Oh, something, that Duke Ellington John Coltrane record? I don't know if I have that or not. Hang on, I might. Yeah, I actually do. Look at that. Yeah, I'm going to pull this out because I'm not even sure if I've ever played this. But the thing about that record, like a lot of other sort of similar records, like the Cluster and Eno record and shit like that, is that, or Coltrane and Thelonious Monk, is that none of these records, or I haven't heard of any of these records that they captured either of the musicians at their very best. You know what I mean? I've heard actually better things about this one than most of these, but I haven't heard that this was Ellington at his best or Coltrane at his best. So, you know, again, same deal with Cluster and Eno. The Sun Ra and John Cage, same deal. You know, as far as jazz singing, Thumpfinger, I fucking hate jazz singing, to be honest with you. Like Abbey Lincoln, Ella Fitzgerald, Nina Simone, I know who these people are. I realize who I'm slagging here. I've got no use for any of them. Once in a while, there will be a vocal track on a mostly instrumental record that I can dig. I can talk about my issues with that too. Yeah, see, Sarah Vaughan. Okay, listen, Thumpfinger, I'm going to second tone and say you should listen to Sarah Vaughan because Sarah Vaughan is important. Okay, Nina Simone is important too. But I don't give a shit about either of them. Okay, I'd say listen to them on YouTube and then be done with it. And don't feel guilty if it's not for you. If you decide you like it, great, okay, but I don't. And I'll tell you why I don't like it too, because more than any other records, I feel like what's important about jazz is the band. It's the whole thing. It's the whole unit. And on records like that, you hear the band becoming the backing band for the singer. And I don't want to hear that in jazz, man. That's not jazz to me anymore at that point. It's pop. You know what I mean? It's like when you have musicians like fucking Louis Armstrong and he's backing Ella Fitzgerald. I shouldn't talk shit about that one because I haven't heard that specific record, so I'm really talking out of my ass. Okay, but when you hear John Coltrane backing up Johnny Hartman, it's like, what the fuck, you know? So, as far as being a vocalist, I mean, you know, I used to sing a lot too. You know, that's kind of where I was coming from originally, and maybe that's part of why it took me a while to get into jazz. But when I got into it with a vengeance. Yeah, I feel like the vocals stripped their band of their freedom. The one where Coltrane asked for the beer openers, that's on Relaxin' with the Miles Davis Quintet. Yeah. And I think it's Relaxin'. The one with Monk, that's Bag's Groove, where you can hear Miles getting a little pissy with one of the guys in the chatter. So, when I was in high school, though, I was actually the bass player, but there was like a jazz choir that was all like Manhattan Transfer covers. And I'll be honest, man. I mean, I got into that because I wanted to play and because it was fun and because I was into choral groups myself, and so I was friends with a lot of people in there anyway from other groups. But I really kind of came to really not like that music at all, to say the least. I mean, shit like the Manhattan Transfer or fucking Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, fuck that shit, man. Especially Manhattan Transfer, man, or like Rare Silk. I hate that shit. Bobby McFerrin. God, talk about Reagan era jazz. My God. Wynton Marsalis is like the picture of integrity compared to those fucks. Although one of the good things about that shit is I learned a lot of standards. And Tone, you're right about vocals, but it changes the nature of jazz. It changes the nature of rock too, but see, I think rock is built around that because the roots of rock are more pop. That the roots of jazz aren't pop, you know what I mean? Which is why I work really hard to get past being put off by a jazz band doing a Beatles cover, okay? Because if it's 1970, that's pop music the same way that in 1950, a song like Yesterday's would have been a pop song, you know what I mean? Or, whatever else. Something from Porgy and Bess, okay? It's just pop that I sort of identify with more readily as a rocker. So, it's harder for me to get past, you know what I'm saying? So, Anesthesia. Yeah, I tried to learn Anesthesia. Um, so yeah, I feel like it changes it. You know what I mean? It's I really said what I have to say about it, though. I'm not going to add anything else. Bottom line is, I don't like a jazz band as a backup band to a singer. Maybe if that's where I was coming from, that's okay. I suppose the argument that I'm making here, I could also make about Genesis. You know, that band shouldn't be a backup band for a singer. But coming from a rock background and that band playing within the rock idiom, that doesn't seem fucked up to me the way it does with the jazz. You know? So is that arbitrary? Maybe. I'll just fucking own it, you know? Alright, let me put on the record here, and then we'll talk about another one. God damn, man, we listened to a whole LP, and I've talked about one book so far. No, it's 3. Never mind. Means I'm doing great. Can you all hear that loud-ass cricket? Alright, this one just came in the mail today. This is Mabumi Yamaguchi Quartet. God, I'm trying to show this thing. And what's the name of the record? Leeward, whatever that means. Alright, so let's fire this bad boy up. Okay. Aaron, the pop vocalist, the 11 That'd be funny. All right. Okay, so here's another book. This is kind of related to the house that Train built, and it's actually, I got it at the same time. It's this one, Blue Note Records. And that's just the name of it. Shane, thanks for joining, dude. I missed you on Grown Man Record Night yesterday. I just fucking crashed, man. I mean, I didn't completely crash. I started watching a movie because I didn't feel like watching Grown Man Record Night, honestly, and I fell asleep. But, yeah. Anyway, this book right here is very comprehensive and very dry. It was really kind of a tough read. Richard Cook, I don't know what his deal is, but it's not writing, because this book was fucking really dry. And I kind of felt like, you know, there's the main stable of Blue Note, you know, it was like, you had your Horace Silver, you had Lee Morgan, who's on the cover, you had Herbie Hancock when he was doing his thing there, you had Wayne Shorter, you know, you had Hank Mobley, you know, and all these guys who made lots of records get lots of time in this book. Some of the other guys, though, where I would have been curious to learn more, like Jack Wilson. You know, some of these guys who didn't, you know, have the sort of long Blue Note career that some of these other guys did. They just sort of seemed to come and go really quickly and fade into obscurity really quickly. I would have been interested in learning a little bit more about those guys, and this book didn't really deliver on that front. As far as just sort of giving an overview of the timeline and what was going on when and that sort of thing, this was a very good book. And I think it's worth reading. That's interesting. I didn't even wrote The Penguin Guide to Jazz. Is The Penguin Guide to Jazz readable? Because this one barely was, man. So fucking turgid, this English, man. And there's like genuine critique here too, you know, like just opening up it randomly, okay? Donald Byrd, apparently he's talking about Byrd's first Blue Notes are careful, enjoyable hard bop sessions, and not a great deal more. There seems little to say about them since their smooth playability offers plenty to entertain and not much to remember once the discs are over. Byrd in hand, with a bevy of fellow Detroit men in the lineup, might be the best of the first few. I agree with that, actually. I like those records. I couldn't name any cuts off any of them or hum a tune from any of them, but they're good, and Bird in Hand is probably the best one. But I hate to say it, but this book does the same thing. It's not super memorable in that sense, you know? But what I did feel like I got from this was a good sense of the timeline, sort of the arc of Blue Note, and how, you know, what was happening when. And I just felt like I put the pieces together. It was like I had a lot of puzzle pieces in my record collection, and that thing kind of put them in a frame. You know what I mean? So, you know, unfortunately, a lot of these writers are pretty dry. You want a really dry book? The audio sounds clicky. Is it the speaking or is it the what do you call it? I think the mic might be a little bit hot. The thing keeps turning red. Should I mess with it? Does anyone like second what he's saying here? Hang on, I'll fuck with it for a sec. I don't know if I can without stopping the stream though. Yeah, I'm not going to stop streaming. Oh, well, if I'm good on the TV, man, then hey. Because that's what it's all about, right? It's about fucking TV, dude. Dude, you're right about that Bud Powell story. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, Bud Powell is kind of a nutcase, though. Yeah, I forgot. I'm glad you brought that up, man. That's fucking funny. Yeah, just a little static. All right, well, you know, I'll try not to yell too loud directly into the thing or anything. The big screen theologian, right? Yeah, I heard a story like that about Giuseppe Logan once, too, in... where did I read it? It was some ESP thing I read. There's a book about ESP records that I want to get one of these days, but I haven't yet. But there was something I was reading about it where, like, Giuseppe Logan turned up and, like, I think he said this to, what was the name of the lawyer who was, like, the mastermind behind ESP? Max, thank you. I appreciate that. And Words Are in Music. I'm not recommending this book. For just Blue Note, this is a pretty good book. It's just dry, and you're not going to learn anything without listening to the records based on that book, okay? Some of these, you can learn some shit without, or get some insight into what's going on with them based on the writing. That is not one of them, okay? If that answers your question. What was I just talking about? I forgot. Oh, yeah, Giuseppe Logan. Yeah, so, God, what was the guy's name? Anyway, I guess Logan came up one time and, like, you know, he was, like, going to the studio to record, and the dude walked by, and he was like, if you touch my money, I'll kill you. Shit like that. He was like, and the guy was like, fuck, man. So, yeah, I love these stories, man. The lighter side of drug addiction, right? All right, so let me pull this one out because this one is also about a artist. Space is the Place, Sun Ra. Big surprise to see me showing this one, right? I found this book to be decidedly mediocre. I think John Swed seemed to have the best of intentions. I think he approached this a little bit too archaeologically, in that in his discography, it's all based on when the sessions were recorded and trying to, like, trace all that shit down rather than actually, like, what order the records came out in. And I mean, what order the records came out in is already a mess, but when shit was recorded, it was an even bigger mess. So trying to unravel that, I'm not going to say it's a waste of time, but I will say that I wish that some of the time he had spent on that, he had spent on writing the second half of the book, because this book is very good until about the mid-60s. Like, the early days of Sun Ra through Chicago, there's a lot of interesting stuff. Then when he moves to New York, it kind of drops down a little bit. Then he goes to Philadelphia. It's like 10 pages and the book's over. It's almost like, I mean, it reads like he was up against a deadline. And he had to just like hammer out the second half of the book real fast, which turned out being a lot less than the second half of the book, right? But I really, the bummer about that is, as distinctive and unique as Sun Ra's 60s records are, I really kind of feel like it was in the 70s when he really found his own way in terms of instrumentation, in terms of just sort of what he wanted to do. Because it was really more in the 70s that he was really just sort of going off and with his own instrumentation and whatever else, you know? So, yeah, so it kind of felt like a little bit of a missed opportunity. It definitely shone a little light on him sort of declining in the 80s just due to age, you know, and some of those late records, the very late ones, like from the second half of the 80s and that, don't, I think they're boring, and it's because they just feel so conservative. And it feels like an old man just kind of thinking back on his younger days and sort of wanting to recapture that with his current band a little bit. And I understand that psychologically, but it doesn't inspire me, you know? So up to about 84, 85, I think Sun Ra is 100%. But after that, man, which of the numerous books on Miles do I like, Dave Weekly? The Miles autobiography. I actually talked about it a bit at the beginning of the video. It's probably before you tuned in. I haven't read a whole shit ton of them, honestly, but I heard that the autobiography was the one to go for, so that was the first one I read, and I don't see anything topping that because that's just a motherfucker of a read, man. Melvin agreeing about the Sun Ra book. Turntablist, it did get me psyched to dig out some of the Sun Ra recordings too, and there are a few specific ones. In fact, the talk in that book about When Angels Speak of Love is part of what sort of got me on such a quest. I made another video where I talked about how that was like now the only one from the 60s that I was missing as far as shit that was actually released in the 60s, and that's true, and I would kind of like to complete that era. But even more than that, the shit that he's doing on that record was just so its own thing. I mean, even among Sun Ra records, it's unique. So yeah, so that record kind of got me going down that. And yeah, Melvin, you're right about a lot of jazz writing. I kind of hate to say it. Now, where's that fucker? Someone just mentioned this book. And this was a very good book. This one, actually, I feel like it rightly appreciated what Coltrane was doing in terms of the second half of the 60s, you know, from like 65 to 67 when he went like balls out free. I think Eric Nisenson understands how that was an extension of what he'd been doing all along. I can really hear in Coltrane's records a pretty direct path from the early hard bop shit into the modal shit that he was doing with Miles into the sheets of sound stuff. Those might be reversed, but you know, just sort of these are the sort of the stopping points, right? The sheets of sound stuff I can really sort of hear as a predecessor to the free stuff. And even though he kind of went off in another direction for a little while with like Africa Brass and you know, the first live at the Village Vanguard record and some of those other ones, you can really sort of hear the the progression, in a way. I don't want to say culminating because it makes it sound like it's the end, but even more than what's the one called? Expression. I feel like the last Coltrane album is Interstellar Space, the one that's just duets with him and Rashid Ali, because somehow that feels like he's found a destination in a way that I don't hear on any other record to quite the same degree. And that isn't to say that he wouldn't have made more great records if he hadn't lived another 10 years, But it's interesting because even though Expression is the last one that came out while he was alive, or actually I think came out right afterwards, the last shit he recorded, I kind of feel like Interstellar Space is like logically the last one. So let's see. Beware of the Baker documentary. You'd appreciate jazz. That's interesting. I watched about half of that, and I didn't finish it for some reason or another. I don't know why, because I really enjoyed it. So maybe I missed some of that. I love Africa Brass, too. I'm right there with you, turntablist. And Interstellar Space, well, I was going to say it's not that hard to find, but I bought mine not even 10 years ago. I bought mine probably 5-6 years ago, but even 5-6 years ago, shit was easier to find than it is now. So, Dave, I'm glad you like the topic. I was a little on the fence. I wasn't sure if anyone else would like this topic other than me, but honestly, I kind of wish someone else had made this video for me when I was trying to find jazz books. So I'm trying to go in there. But listen, if you have a lot of jazz books you've never taken the time to read, I'd be curious to see what you find. Okay, this one, As Serious as Your Life. I don't know if this one's as well known. This is The Story of the New Jazz by Valerie Wilmer. This book definitely feels... Oh, okay, first of all, I want to give props because this is written by a woman, and you don't see that very often. Okay? In fact, I was so surprised by it, I actually went and looked to make sure it was a woman and not just like a guy using the like Vivian Weathers, who played with Linton Kwesi Johnson's group. If you dig the reggae at all, yeah, that was actually a guy. But Valerie Wilmer is actually a woman who actually apparently hung out with these guys and was really into it. And not only was really into the jazz, but was really into the free shit that was happening, when she wrote this in 1977. So I'll be honest, I don't remember this book all that specifically. It definitely feels a lot more political than musical, this book. She's really interested in the Black Power aspect of free jazz and the statement of it as opposed to the music on its own terms. And I think that's an important topic, actually, and I think it's an interesting topic. But at the end of the day, the music is what I care about. You know what I mean? I'm all for Black Power and political statements and all that shit. But what I care about most, more than anything else in the world, is music. And so now some smart ass is going to say, well, what about your family? Well, don't ask me questions I don't feel like discussing. So, okay, is Blue Train overrated? Yes and no. I think as a hard bop record, it is not overrated. Blue Train is an absolutely great record, and if Coltrane was going to make one record on Blue Note, which is what that was, it's hard to imagine him making a better record than that one as far as embodying the Blue Note sound and the Blue Note ethic, but very clearly with Coltrane's voice, with his own idiosyncrasies in there, and with some just fucking great tunes, okay? However, Blue Note or Blue Train is not the be-all and end-all of John Coltrane, and I feel like there are few acts of jazz malpractice that I feel kind of more strongly about than when I hear someone say, oh, you want to check out Coltrane, you need to check out Blue Train. That's a great record. Okay? Even though every word in that sentence is true, that is such Okay, what that is it shows Coltrane having arrived at one of the waypoints along his sort of musical journey. Okay, and that waypoint is fully realized. Okay, but it's like if you talked with me when I was um, 17 about music. Okay, I was trying to think of a better analogy. You know, when I was 17, I had very clear opinions. I could have told you why I liked the music that I was into. I was going around this shit that I'm doing right now, man. I was doing just the same then. Fucking people who have known me that long, they tell me as much. I know it's true. You know, and there's shit that I like now that I hated back then, and there's shit that I was way into back then where now I'm like, I didn't really know why I thought that was such a big deal. But back then I could have articulated all that shit because I cared about it, and that's where I was right then. When I compare that to where I am now, having gotten so into jazz and into all these other sort of areas, it feels really small and really kind of constrained and really limited to me. You know what I mean? And I feel like if you were to judge me as a as someone who loves music and appreciates music based on what I would have said about it when I was 17, I would feel like you were only getting about this much of the whole. And that's what Blue Train is for Coltrane. Okay, that's probably kind of a shitty analogy, but I think for demonstrating that moment in time and a, for being a superior hard bop record, 100%. And it belongs in your record collection. But if you're only going to buy 20 jazz records, it does not belong in your collection. If you're buying 100, it belongs in your collection, okay? It wouldn't make my top 20, though. And again, it's not because it's great. If you asked me to suggest 20 records, and that was going to be your jazz collection, there are records that I like less than Blue Train that I might recommend, but that's because it's about getting the whole picture and not just this little sort of, squish of hard bops. So I would say the same thing for Love Supreme too, unequivocally. In fact, honestly, a Love Supreme I do think is overrated. And that doesn't mean I don't love a Love Supreme, okay? I think it's a fantastic record. But I just think Coltrane did a lot better. I think the John Coltrane Quartet Plays is a more fun listen than that record. I think Africa Brass is a more fun listen than that record. I appreciate what he was doing on that record, but from the standpoint of what he was doing as far as like the spiritual reaching that he was doing, I feel like that's more fully attained on a record like Meditations, which is probably my favorite Coltrane record, although it's tough. Or I feel like it's a cop-out to say Interstellar Space after what I said about it earlier. But even Ascension, I just feel like those are the records where there's really, I feel like they look up in a way that a Love Supreme doesn't, if that makes sense as a metaphor. Yeah, I like Giant Steps more than a Love Supreme too. Giant Steps, and in fact, I'd say Giant Steps is better than Blue Train too, because it's in a similar vein, but it's way more bold. I don't know if it's really accurate to call that a hard bop record underneath it all, but it sure as hell vibes out like a hard bop record, but it's just so fucking brain melting at the same time, What's my favorite metal record? Dude, I'm going to have to save that for another video. Yeah, I can't pick a favorite metal record. I sure as hell can't do it off the top of my head. I did make a video a couple years ago about my top 10 records from 1984. I was going to do some other years too, but I never got around to it. But if you go and check that out, it'll give you a pretty good idea as to where I'm coming from in any case. So, Chemical, have you been watching my channel for very long? And I don't mean to be a dick. I don't mean this like in a shitty way or anything. I'm just genuinely curious, because I don't want to tell you shit you already know, but I'll repeat myself. It's okay. I just want to repeat myself if you've heard it before. So, meanwhile, while you're answering, this was a book I really enjoyed, The Freedom Principle. Not the best written. Okay, just kind of let this drawer open, by the way. And one thing about buying used books is you get shit like this. You see that marginal note there? What the fuck? I usually don't like when people write in books, but man, I gotta make exceptions. It's because, yeah, and right there he's saying, he's talking about Albert Eiler. One of the briefer 1965 pieces is A New Angels, which has Carl Cobb's frilly lace harpsichord accompanying an Eiler tenor solo, aching of nostalgia for cranky grandmothers who bake apple pies and quietly fart a lot. The tenor vibrato and big theme tones with their little trailing away decorations are charming and elephantine. Okay, I can understand writing what the fuck in the margin there about nostalgia for cranky grandmothers who bake apple pies and fart a lot. I don't know if that's how I would describe anything by Albert Eiler, but it's a pretty good stab at it. So anyway, yeah, this one is definitely written with a little bit more passion. I actually think I just gave you a little bit of a hint on that. If you're into this shit and you're excited about reading about the free jazz, it gets off to a little bit of a slow start because it has a chapter on Ornette Coleman and on Eric Dolphy and Coltrane and then Miles Davis and modal jazz, okay? And it's like when you're chomping at the bit and you're like, I want to hear Albert Eiler and the Chicago guys and shit. It's like, okay, well, you know, you can just slog through that or just like, you know, skip over those chapters. They're worth reading, though. This is a very good book. Yeah, I wish I remembered a little bit better because I read it a few years ago. I read all these a while ago, honestly, so I'm kind of going off my larger impressions than specifics. But, you know, there's a chapter on Cecil Taylor, Leo Smith, Anthony Braxton, Joseph Jarman, and Roscoe Mitchell, and then ending in free jazz today. It's just a legitimate book written with genuine appreciation for free jazz. Going into the history, but not spending through with Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane, but not spending so much time there that he just neglects all the guys who were really practicing it over the longer term. You know what I'm saying? Chemical, right on. Shit, man. If you're watching it since Spencer was a baby. All right. Well, in fairness, he was like 11 or 12 when I started this shit. But yeah, he's getting ready to go away to school, so I'm getting his shoes. Awesome. Yeah, you're right. The guy's opinionated. And I hear this guy even more opinionated, though. Speaking of that Coltrane book from before, has anyone read this one, Blue, The Murder of Jazz, by Eric Nisenson? I didn't realize that about John Litweiler and the liner notes. So if you're watching this later, Words Your Music just told me that this dude wrote liner notes for a lot of jazz records. I'll be honest, man, I don't read liner notes the way I did when I first got into it. I've gotten lazy about it. But I'm going to start looking again. And sometimes they say interesting shit, but I don't necessarily retain the names. I mean, if it's like Ira Gittler or someone like that, or Warren Keep News or Nat Hentoff, or it's just one of those names, you know, then that's one thing. I noticed that. But with the free stuff, not always as much, you know. So, yeah, Chemical, because you had a good answer, I'll try to remember to make a video, and if I forget, call me out on it. But I'm not going to be able to come up with one favorite metal record, I'll tell you right now. Maybe the Black Death record. But I could probably come up with another candidate pretty easily. So, all right, I don't know Charles Gale. So, Jeff, you just turned me on to something, too. And thanks. And Max, as far as trying to learn about jazz, that would be a good place to start. That's tough, man. Nasty metal. It's all jazz today, dude. I'm sorry. Someone's asking me, hey, Nasty Metal, listen. Chemical Reaction. He's asking what the best metal record is. Okay? So, help me think of something while I sit here and talk about these jazz books, okay? Because that dude, he knows his shit, okay? If Nasty Metal tells you something's good, it at least deserves a listen. I don't like all the same shit he likes, but I've never heard him say, I've never heard him say this is a great record and go, Jesus, what the fuck are you talking about, man? You know, that doesn't happen. Okay, see, Kind of Blue. I was just railing against Kind of Blue as a starting point before, okay? The thing is, if you start with Kind of Blue and you do the thing where you get records by the people on it and then get records by the people on those records, you'll have a great collection before very long. By the time you get to 50 records, man, you're going to have gem after gem. So there's something to that, okay? Honestly, I feel like a pretentious ass saying this, but go check out my 5 jazz records for the Curious Novice video. Because I'll tell you, I'll stand by those. And I don't remember exactly what there was, but there was an Ornette Coleman, there was a Mingus, there was a Sun Ra, because there's always a Sun Ra with me. And I don't remember what the other 2 were. But I picked records that were not car commercial jazz, that were a little more challenging than that. And, a little more difficult than that. But weren't just like so fucking crazy that it would be impossible to get into if you hadn't already been primed, you know? I think you're right about Way Out West. I think that was on the list, and I don't remember what Sun Ra it was, but it's kind of arbitrary beyond a certain point because there were just so many great ones. It might have been Secrets of the Sun. I know the Mingus was Blues and Roots, which I started this video talking about, and the who else? Oh, Ornette Coleman. I picked This Is Our Music because maybe Shape of Jazz to Come. I just got distracted because I said Nasty Metal. What's the best metal album? Fucking I asked him an impossible question. Dude says Winter Kill by Slaughter Extroyes is a pretty good candidate. You know something? That's a really fucking good candidate. Yeah, in fact, I'm going to show that real quick, and then we'll talk about Eric Nice's and some more. This record, it's not as underrated as it was before Monster Records. Now Rockadrome started hyping it. But this record is so fucking good. Okay, Slaughter Extroyes, Winter Kill. It's like no shit epic metal. Has some real prog moves without being so far up itself that you just lose it. It's like heavy metal, but like with lots of intricate parts and just like layers and layers of shit to unpack. It's a 10 out of 10. All day long. Charles Gale. Oh, that's a hell of a story. Turntablist. It is a pricey private press, but there was a reissue of it that they put out. I think Monster put it out. Monster was the predecessor for Rockadrome. So I would start by going to Rockadrome. First of all, the dude's cool, all right? You're dealing with Dennis, you're dealing with good people. He won't fuck you. And if he says something's in good shape, it's in good shape. If you say, dude, is this record good or is it a piece of shit? If it's a piece of shit, he'll be like, yeah, it's probably a piece of shit. I don't know if he has any copies of it left. I think they did a 500 run. And honestly, I don't think that reissue is all that cheap anymore. But there is a CD of it if you really get stuck. And it's probably just a matter of time before someone else does it anyway. So keep your eyes open. It's a great record. Just listen to it online if you don't do anything else. Seriously. Yeah, turntables. I feel guilty showing the private presses sometimes because I have a lot of those because I was collecting them. I've been collecting this for kind of a long time, you know. I mean, I got really into collecting that shit like 99, 2000-ish, something like that. So, you know. Oh, yeah? Did you see Dennis at the Austin Record Show? I didn't know that was today. Jeff, are you in Austin? That's actually where I met Dennis, was there. In fact, which is how I met Phil Baker, who was his old partner, because I was looking for a new wave of British heavy metal shit. And Dennis was working the record show, and I said, "Hey, man, you got any new wave 45s?" And he was like, "You really need to talk to my partner, Phil." So I got to know Phil and kind of became friends with Phil, and really always knew Phil better than I knew Dennis. And I don't want to talk about someone else's dirty laundry, but the whole like falling out was bad, and what it really came down to was that Phil had serious. He was mentally ill, like literally, and he should have been on meds, but he wasn't because he refused to take them, and his life fell apart, and he ended up committing suicide. It was terrible. And Dennis couldn't deal with it anymore, which must have been heartbreaking for him because they had been friends for like 20, 30 years. They'd moved to San Antonio together from Chicago. So, I've had friends die, but I can only imagine having to break off a relationship with a friend like that. I've never had to do that, so yeah. So anyway, I feel for Dennis in that regard. And I was friends with Phil, so I mean, Phil was pissed. He was saying some shit, but I was like, dude, sorry, man, but I'm on Dennis's side of this one because I couldn't deal with it either, you know? All right, small town near Austin. Now I want to know what small town that was. Because I lived in Austin for about a year and a half. I might not know it. But, Jeff Schwertfeger. What a great name. Great name for that part of Texas, actually, too. All right, let me start talking about this while I'm waiting for Jeff to tell me what the town is. All right, so Blue, the Murder of Jazz. This book is like a 200-page tirade, okay? And for that, it's very entertaining. The dude basically wrote this. This was like the peak of the jazz wars, okay? And if you know about the jazz wars, man, go read it up because it's kind of funny in retrospect. All right, I don't know where Wimberley is, but Spencer was born in Round Rock. In fact, he was looking at going to UT, and even though we left Texas when he was maybe 6 months old, something like that, I guess if you register a car there, you can get a license plate that says like native Texan or something. And he was like, I am so getting one of those because he still has a Texas birth certificate, right? So, San Marcos, that's further out there. That's why I never went out in that direction. So, cool. Thanks for indulging me on that shit, though, man. I'm sure it's all changed so much since I was there, but I never really settled into Austin properly. I mean, I went to Waterloo, but that wasn't even my favorite record store there. Like, all my favorite places from then were gone. Anyway, so this guy's pissed because of some of the discussion. This guy actually opened my eyes a little bit because he spends a lot of time talking about how conservative forces within jazz who, at the time, probably more than now, were really trying to write anything after Ornette Coleman out of history, led by Wynton Marsalis and Stanley Crouch, principally. That's part of why I kind of have a little beef with Wynton Marsalis. That's just because even though the jazz wars were probably over by the time I became aware of them, that whole business kind of pisses me off. The other thing that this kind of goes against is the racial politics around that, frankly. And honestly, I was as guilty as anyone else for a long time of just sort of assuming that any white jazz musicians weren't really legitimate. But I have since learned much better, man. Because I'll tell you, you go through my record collection, it's probably about 70% black, okay? But among that other 30%, there's some fantastic fucking records. And not just from white Americans, but like from Europeans, you know what I mean? So we're talking Benny Goodman, we're talking Bill Evans, we're talking Paul Bley, who I guess is actually Canadian, but Charlie Hayden, okay? But then you go overseas to Europe, and there's this whole world of jazz that didn't even really come into its own until the 70s, you know what I mean? You got the fusion going on in Finland, though. You have the insane free shit they were doing in Germany. You have shit like Joe Harriott in England, not to mention the likes of Derek Bailey. And there was just so much, man, and a lot of that shit was coming into its own, while the U.S. was really kind of mired down in like CTI pop, you know. So yeah, so there's a lot of important jazz made by white people. Um, and what can I say? I mean, I'm not really proud of this. I'm kind of ashamed to say so, but you know, I sort of played that game, and this thing really sort of put its foot up my ass, and made me realize I was being a dick. You know, I'm still not as high on Stan Getz as this guy. But yeah, this is a very fun read. And yeah, The Murder of Jazz, that really kind of sets the tone for it. So if you like the title, you'll probably like the book. On that note, okay, I kind of feel like I'm flexing by showing this one, okay? But this book, unfortunately, is very good, even though it's a very dry read. Lost Chords, that's interesting. I mean, what was sort of the impetus for that was that there were a few cases where there were black musicians or critics who were just dismissing all white jazz out of hand in some really insulting ways too. And I'll let you read the book to like find your own things, but like, yeah, and his attitude was like, who the fuck do you think you are shitting on someone like Jerry Mulligan because of the color of his skin? You know what I mean? I don't really put any names to this because I don't remember exactly who said what, and I don't want to go there attributing like shitty statements to people who don't deserve it. But yeah, I already said what I'd say. I guess it's the guy doesn't deny for a second that jazz is in its origins absolutely or almost entirely, and in its history very predominantly a black medium, an African American medium specifically, but there have been some white jazzmen who have done some great shit and some great jazz. We're listening to a Japanese jazz record right now, man. Okay, so there you go. I prefer Paul Desmond to Stan Getz. In fact, you know something? I feel like I never thought about it this way before, but I feel like Paul Desmond is what people say Stan Getz is. You know, I don't quite the big deal about Stan Getz. Like intellectually, I understand what's supposed to be there because I've heard it discussed, but I don't hear it. I do hear it in Paul Desmond. So yeah, I'm with you, turntablist. Yeah, okay, so on to Eckhard Yost. Unfortunately, okay, so this is European jazz. I mean, that's the title of the book, Europe's Jazz, 1960 to 1980. And goddamn, do I hope that someone translates this. My German is pretty rusty, but it's not so rusty that I can't read this. This book, you've probably heard me say some very superlative things about Joe Harriet. Eckhard Yost turned me on to Joe Harriet. I might even put that on next if that record's over. Yeah, Derek Bailey, Evan Parker. He has there's a chapter in here on. All right, let me put on the record. So I'm not going to be able to think until there's music. I'm putting Joe Harriet though. This is what's up. This Anthony Braxton is a big fan of Paul Desmond. I talked about this a little bit last time, but you know who turned me back on to Dave Brubeck was Cecil Taylor. You know, which kind of seems like night and day a little bit. And Cecil kind of turned his back on Brubeck too. You know, it's like early on he was very into Brubeck and he called it an influence, but later on, I think when Cecil got a little bit bitter about the fact that he was having trouble getting work, which, given his confrontational style, isn't really all that hard to understand. But yeah, I think he kind of took a lot of that out in his attitude towards Brubeck, kind of unfairly. But him talking about Brubeck as an influence, and I was already such a Cecil Taylor fan, it was kind of it made me go back and listen to Brubeck again. That made me appreciate him. Now, this record that I'm putting on right now, Abstract by Joe Harriott, this was actually the first non-U.S. record to get 5 stars in Downbeat magazine, which was their highest rating. And that review was written by Harvey Pekar of American Splendor fame. If you want to call it fame, that might be a little bit of a stretch, but yeah, Cecil had a hell of a personality. I'm not the only one here who knows about Harvey Pekar, right? Maybe I'll tell stories about him if someone else does, because I ran into him a few times in Cleveland. All right, so this book has chapters on it. It's more or less by country, okay? First chapter is an introduction forward, then The Forgotten Message of Joe Harriott. Then something about Wolfgang Downer, Günter Hampel, and Andrei Trasovsky. We just found out about Harvey. Dude, American Splendor I discovered when I was in high school. I was fucking blew my mind. So I was working in the library and I found that shit. And as it turns out, Harvey, if you live in Cleveland, or if you did live in Cleveland, because he's dead now, obviously, but if you lived in Cleveland, like when I was working at the record store and like hunting for records, then he was one of those guys that you would just run into around town. You know what I mean? Because if you like went to a library book sale, it was even money that he was going to turn up too. So like the first time I met Harvey Pekar, I just recognized him from the books, Have I told the story about when I sent Harvey Pekar to meet a friend of mine at the record store? Hey, Mr. Bizarro, thanks for joining, dude. Yeah, the Letterman interviews are great. The vinyl movie, I didn't really like him in that particularly, but that's kind of the way he was. If you liked him all the time, whatever. In fact, his writing too was surprisingly dry. I was kind of bummed at how hard to read his jazz reviews were, because I know he took so much pride in them on the one hand, and on the other hand, I liked his comic writing so much. You know what I mean? Anyway, someone tell me if I've told that story already, because I'll tell it again, because I think it's a funny story. But if you've all heard it 10 times, I won't bother, okay? So the next chapter is 7 Ways to Get into Freedom. And it has John Stevens, Manfred Schoff, Alexander von Schlippenbach, Peter Brotzmann, Wolfgang Downer, Gruppo Romano Free Jazz, and Vladimiras Nahorny, talking about a specific record by each of them, okay? Then there's a chapter on Germany, a chapter on East Germany, because it's written in the 80s, right? Great Britain, Netherlands, France. Yeah, and then just some notes and shit like that. So anyway, this has a ton of information that is very difficult to come by. I tried finding information about these acts online when I first got into European jazz, and I could find fuck all, man. I'm telling you. So this thing was like a gold mine. I've kind of read it in pieces, but I feel so strongly about this book that I've thought about translating it myself, honestly. And there was a brief period of time where I thought I wanted to translate professionally, and I gave up on it because I hated it. Translating is horrible work. Okay, I fucking loathe it. But this is such an important book. It needs to be translated. Yeah, it's in German. All right, so you want to hear about Harvey Pekar. So I got in touch with Harvey Pekar because I was collecting the American Splendors, and I kind of wish I gotten a copy of #1 because he only wanted $20 for it back then. And now now you look for it on eBay, and yeah, you know, you're dreaming on about getting a new copy from Harvey Pekar for $20, right? But he only wanted like you know, cover price for the other early ones that I was missing. So he gave me he hooked me up with copies of like 2, 3, 4, and maybe one other one that I was missing. So I was like, I don't remember how I paid him because I didn't. There was this pre-PayPal, right? Maybe I mailed him a check or something. But anyway, he was like, yeah. So he lived on the east side and I was on the west side. Okay, so I was working in the record store at the time. So he came, he was like, listen, yeah, on Saturday or whatever day it was, I'm going to be over in Lakewood anyway. So, you know, if you want, I can just pop into the record store. I can just drop this shit by or something. You're going to be working, I can drop at the record store. And I was like, fuck, I'm not working that day because I had some choral thing going on, actually. I was singing somewhere, okay? But I was like, but you know something? When you go in there, ask for Frank. Okay, because Frank Vazano was working that day. It was a dude I worked with there, who was actually in the Cleveland band Quasimodo, if you've ever heard of them. They're good, very good. And actually, Frank turned me on to Lester Bangs. But yeah, so basically, I wasn't there, right? I didn't tell Frank, okay? But Harvey Pekar just shows up at the store one day and says, "Hey, is Frank here?" And of course, Frank knew who he was. So he was like, what the fuck? Fucking Harvey Pekar just showed up and he's asking for me, you know? So he was just giving him the magazines to hang on to for me, but he was like, yeah, that was kind of awesome. You know? So that was my story about sending Harvey Pekar to meet a friend of mine. So kind of lost touch with Frank, but he's a good dude. If I heard from him, I'd like welcome him with open arms. I believe he still lives in Cleveland. So here's another Eckhard Yost book that is English. It's Free Jazz, and this is considered an important book. It's an important book because it is a musicological analysis of free jazz that apparently when it came out was the first of its time. This came out in the early 70s. I want to say 72. 75. 74. This edition is copyright 75. This edition is actually 94, but this publisher 75 is probably the original is. This, I'm impressed you found it in the used bookstore. So this one actually charts out the shit. Now, that is the chart out for some Albert Eiler shit. You know, it's interesting to see certain things discussed, like, yeah, here is a transcription of Saturn by Sun Ra. You know, there are these little things in there. But this is a pretty difficult book. The one thing, actually, that I really got from this more than any other, and which is kind of what this book is known for more than anything, as far as I know, is that this guy came up with a vocabulary to talk about some of the free jazz stuff in a way that it hadn't been done before. And very specifically, he deepened my appreciation for Cecil Taylor, and even more than that for Sonny Murray, because Cecil, God damn, I've been talking for an hour and a half. Okay, well, Cecil, you know, he has a style, right? But his way of talking about it is like that you're sort of wasting your time thinking about it in terms of, like, you know, harmonic progression and shit like that. You think about it as these energy impulses, you know what I mean, that sort of build and draw back in that. And Sonny Murray's real contribution to Cecil Taylor's music was coming up with a drumming style that would propel that forward. And if you listen to that shit, you can really hear that. It's well put. The biggest shortcoming in this book, aside from the dry writing and sometimes overly technical discussion of some of this stuff, is that it really shows that the Sun Ra records available to this guy in Europe were extremely limited. The only ones that he has at his disposal in writing about Sun Ra in here is Sun Song and Sound of Joy on Delmark, the futuristic sounds of Sun Ra on Savoy, the heliocentric worlds of Sun Ra 1 and 2 on ESP, live at the Donaueschingen and Berlin festivals on MPS, and Nuit de la Fondation Mate 1 and 2 on Shandar, okay? If those are the only Sun Ra records you listen to, you get a very tiny sliver of what Sun Ra was about. And, I don't know how the hell he would have gotten his hands on the Saturn records. They only sold them at shows. And it's not like they had the money to travel to Europe all the time. So, Eckhart was probably up Schitt's Creek on that front. We're fortunate enough to live in an era when enough of that shit's been reissued that we can get that shit now without spending an arm and a leg. But it's... when you read him talking about Sun Ra, it feels like there's some big, lacunae in his, discussion. Just, these big sort of gaps that he really doesn't even address. And those gaps are Saturn records that he hadn't heard and didn't have access to. So it's kind of interesting from a historical standpoint to see that. What else do we have here? We're almost through the stack. Notes and Tones... about my fucking toilet paper bookmark. Are you trying to do better than that? This is more like musicians just talking about shit, grumbling about issues with the industry, people being racist, people not paying them, and some other shit. It's a lot of people in here. Generally pretty short chapters. But it's kind of cool to hear about, just these guys talking. And the fact that it's Art Taylor talking with him. I mean, it says musician to musician, but most of these guys have probably played with Art Taylor. I know for a fact that a lot of them had, like Freddie Hubbard, Dexter Gordon, they had probably all played with Art Taylor. Charles Tolliver. So, so it has Dexter Gordon, Miles Davis, Randy Weston, Ornette Coleman, Philly Joe Jones, Don Baez, Ron Carter, Johnny Griffin, Charles... you don't care about all this. Art Blakey, Thelonious Monk, Elvin Jones, Kenny Dorham, Don Cherry, Sonny Rollins. So it's, it's interesting, but it's more it's less like a book about jazz and more just like a series of little snapshots. This is almost more like a photo album than a book about jazz. You know what I'm saying? This Mingus book, I didn't finish. A lot of it just felt like, oh yeah, check it out, I forgot about this. I found this business card. It's bail bonds from Yummy Fullwood. I think Yummy Fullwood is one of the best names of all time. So I kept her business card. But a lot of the shit was just like him bragging and kind of coming off like an asshole. And there's some interesting stories. But you know something, man? It's like everyone knows Miles was a prick, right? Mingus didn't exactly have a reputation of being the nicest guy on the planet either. But somehow with Miles, the stories are worth it. With Mingus, just kind of not. It's just kind of aggravating. And I mean, I made it most of the way through. By the time I got that far, I just had enough. I put the book down. I didn't pick it up again. So I really don't recommend that. I'm Beneath the Underdog. I can give you 5 Mingus records I'd recommend. It'll take you less time to listen to all of those than to read this book, and it's time much better spent. Finally, there's this one, which actually Lester Bangs turned me on to, so we're sort of coming circle here. I showed As Serious as Your Life earlier in the video. That's funny. Where is it? Yeah, sorry, man. I'd come back around on it, but I don't want to be a dick to everyone. But hopefully these videos are like fun to watch on YouTube after the fact. So I don't want to like double around too many times. 4 Lives in the Bebop Business. Okay. Which is funny because when I read this seemed like, lesser known guys compared with like the Coltrane and the Miles. But now Cecil Taylor, Ornette Coleman, and Jackie McLean are all like giants to me. And the only one who seems obscure at all is Herbie Nichols, who's great and underrated, which comes across in the story. It's a good book, but again, it's more about the frustrations of being a jazz musician and less about the music. And even though there are stories and all the stuff kind of factors in anyway, at the end of the day, I'd rather learn about the history of jazz than about the history of Cecil Taylor's frustrations with pianos and dive bars being out of tune. You know what I mean? So that's interesting about the book making more sense if you skip around in a certain sequence. I could see that possibly, but yeah, I don't know, man. I just thought it came off like a tool. All right, so the other book in the stack here is the one I was actually reading currently. I only just started it, though, but it's Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. And I'm not in any position to discuss this one because I haven't read it yet, so we'll just leave it at that. Kind of being a tool for even showing that kind of a book off. All right, so what do you want to talk about? That's what I had on my agenda. And I was afraid about going through all this in 10 minutes and not having any meat in the video. And here it's an hour and 36 minutes in. More Harvey stories. Let me think. I mean, I only met him a few times, and there weren't really any like great stories. That one was really the best one. I remember the first time I met him was at a library book sale, and he was just standing there looking at some shit, and I was like, "Oh my God, you're Harvey Pekar, aren't you?" And he was like, "Yeah." Just a normal dude, man. But it was funny because like all those different styles of like drawing him, but it contributes to this whole where when you see him in person, I was like, oh yeah, holy shit, I don't think I have any others, but I'll bust out my American Splendors real quick, though, if you're curious. I'll show off my American Splendors. You want to see my American Splendors, man? I love them. Dude, I'll tell you something. I got gotten rid of lots. I mean, I don't collect comic books, okay? Let me bust these out. Took me a minute. All right, man. Well, I'm glad you're into it. Yeah, it's funny. There's all this shit like mixed in here, like that, you know. Pete Buttigieg on the cover, right? No, I'm not a Trump guy. I just thought that one comment was a little bit funny. Yeah, so here we go, man. Fucking, this is number, what, 13? All Stories by Harvey Pekar. And these fucking cover stories are always good too, or comics too. Think the country will last another 10 years? The country, no. The world, maybe. You know? Let's see if this one's signed. Yeah, Florida. Yeah, I love these stories, man. The art is just so good. And the little just like normal stories. Yeah, this is like inspiring for me too. Like at the time, he was like, you know, talking about having all these records, and you know, I had maybe 1 or 2,000 when I first got into this shit, right? But he's like, yeah, I finally sold about 6,000 of them to a dealer, made some decent money trying to get rid of some, but I still had about 9,000 more LPs. What was I gonna do with them, you know? So yeah, I've never been close to 15,000 records, but you know, there we go. So he talks about his fucking cat pissing on his Charlie Parker records. And he's like, when I found out what happened, man, it was too awful to contemplate. This is like how I would respond. Charlie Parker, one of the greatest of all 20th century musicians, and Inky had gone and fouled his records. Well, I knew what I had to do then. I didn't even want to think about records anymore. Yeah, alright, so there's one. Gotta figure out how I'm gonna put these. Bear with me a sec. Alright, here's another early one. This is number 4. From Off the Streets of Cleveland comes. And there he is trading records with Robert Crumb. I don't know how many in the series, to tell you the truth. I never really counted. It depends on how you count anyway, because there were the independent ones that he published like once a year from like the mid 70s to the early 90s. And then he got picked up by Dark Horse and someone else and published the Cancer Yearbook and a few other things. And, you know, we kind of did that. You know, some of this is worth showing off too. I mentioned working in a record store. But that guy, that's Richard Shahinian. And I figured this out by looking at him. Okay? And that sounds like something he'd say, too, in the speech bubble. But I worked for the Record Exchange. Fortunately, not directly with Rich, because he was a fucking piece of work. But, yeah, he was one of the owners. He was my boss. He wasn't directly my boss, though. He was more like my boss's boss. So, yeah. And yes, $1.50 is in fact really cheap for a Clifford Brown record. $1.15, dude. This is American Splendor number 2. More depressing stories from Harvey Pekar's humdrum life. Right there. Can you read that? How smart is she? I don't know. I guess she's about average. Average? Hey, man, average is dumb. So, yeah. Yeah, every so often he'd talk about shit like, there's a comic in one of these about, like, Cleveland versus Chicago polka music. And like, I don't know anything about that kind of shit, but it's just interesting. I mean, I suppose that's like living in Cleveland for, 40, 50 years as opposed to 10 years like I did, So yeah, this is number 12. This is one of his earlier ones with the Letterman appearances. So there you go. Because of course these were all in the books too, right? Yeah, and shit like this, ethnic bakery on Sunday morning. I mean, that's legit, man. Cleveland is still like that if you go to the right places. So I was kind of happy, in fact, when I went up there last year that that wasn't lost. You know what I mean? Because with gentrification and just time going on, you know what I mean? A lot of these ethnic enclaves, they're just assimilating, which on the one hand is great, you know what I mean? Because I'm all for people, you're American by choice, right? So I'm all for people coming in and participating more fully in American society. But on the other hand, you lose something when you lose these little enclaves. So, so number 10, Harvey's latest crapshoot, his third marriage to a sweetie from Delaware, and how his substandard dishwashing strains their relationship. The Letterman interviews are good, so. This is fucking mad. Yeah. This is one of the Dark Horse ones. I don't even remember reading this one. I met Joyce once or twice, too. I don't remember where I met her, though. It's kind of funny, because I know I met her, but I really don't know what the deal was. So, oh, well, anyway. Yeah, this Windfall one. Yeah, these Dark Horse ones aren't really as special, so I'll kind of whip through them. Here's another Windfall one. This one is cool. The Music Comics. I actually got this when I was really kind of high on jazz. So I was like, oh shit, I'm actually going to get all this shit now, Let's get some of jazz. In one of these, there's like a story about him meeting Sun Ra on a Greyhound. Like he's on a Greyhound with Sun Ra and his band. And like, just like talking with him and shit. And like, when I read this when I was a kid, I had no idea, but now I do. But these are like words to live by. I can give you 4 LPs of your choice or $50 for that art ensemble album. I'll take the LPs. Money's still in print. The records aren't. Fuck yeah. Here we go. The David Letterman exploitation issue. Number 14, this one is. That is number 3. So there you go. I heard you went out with Bonnie yesterday. How'd you do? What'd you get off of her? Oh, lousy. All I got is the arm around. But this right here is kind of special, okay? Fucking the Association of Polish Women in the U.S. Shit's legit, man. I'm telling you. Yeah, I remember buying this one on the newsstand. $3.50, number 15. Actually, this one has a story illustrated by Chester Brown. That one right there. You saw a lot of Crumb and, his usual cast, but not so much that one. So, this was actually one of my first ones. Number 6. about how you can learn from the mistakes of others and trying to convince people of socialism, the value of it. Number 5 right here. In this issue, stories about sickness and old people. Right there. Yeah, this one's 1980, number 5. We're almost through these. Yeah, this one's a little bit fucked up. Oh well, I got it that way. Number 9. In this issue, how to alienate people. Plus, Harvey's newest wife appears. See if you can spot her. Yeah, with Toby. It's funny because, like, they address it pretty openly in the movie, but you kind of can read between the lines in the early books that Toby's gay, but it's never addressed, you know? What's my take on obvious metal, like Peace of Mind, Sepultura's Arise, Season in the Abyss, Alice in Chains' Dirt? I always inevitably return to these no matter how far I stray. You probably would love these comics. They're fucking great. Peace of Mind is one of my favorite records ever. This is number 11. The other ones I can't speak to as much. But yeah, I've actually never owned a copy of Arise. Seasons in the Abyss is probably my least favorite Slayer of the ones I have. And I've never really been interested in Alice in Chains. But I've got no beef with any of those records, that's for sure. And I was actually going to look for a copy of Arise when I was at the record store earlier today. And I neglected to. So maybe next time. Who's drew this one? Joe Sacco. American Splendor. From Off the Streets of Cleveland comes. This is number 17. This is when Dark Horse first picked him up. Hey, Ma, the milk looks kind of yellow. Did you put a raw egg in my Wheaties? It's good for you, Hirsch. Number 16 right here. And this is actually at the West Side Market. And I shot a video from the West Side Market. All right, I'll check out Arise. You got me. I might even go and get it tomorrow, but maybe next week if not. Yeah, West Side Market, I made a video from there when I talked about City Chicken. Yeah, I don't go to Cleveland very often, obviously, but the West Side Market's a stop for me, man. So, all right, this is my last one. Number 7, the big divorce issue. It's funny, you know, like several of these are signed, and I haven't found any of them because I haven't looked for them. So, yeah, I had an original of Schizophrenia a long time ago. I just found it at a shop in San Francisco. I didn't think anything of it, so I let it go. So I got it again recently when I got into like the Brazilian shit. And it still didn't really rip my face off. I probably liked Morbid Visions more. But I have those two. Well, there we go. Right there. Standing behind old Jewish ladies in the supermarket lines. And at the bottom, to Aaron, Harvey Pekar. So some of these were already signed when I got them at the newsstand, and the ones I got directly from him, he addressed to me. Or dedicated to me, so. What's the other one? Oh, come on, Bobby. You know I talk about fucking jazz. Jesus Christ. You just start watching me yesterday or something? You say Lord love a dick? Oh, no, a duck. Bizarro Worlds of Oddities. Yeah, Autumn, I'm getting ready to hang it up, man, because I'm kind of tired here. I'm just looking for my Harvey Pekar autographs. Okay, this one I just got at the newsstand. You see, there we go. Harvey Pekar. What's the other one? Beneath the Remains or something like that? That's the other one I have. I only have like two. And neither of them really rips my face off. Yeah, this one he signed to me. There we go. Yeah, these are really cool, man. You know, I probably could have taken better care of them, but, you know, I'm not a comic collector. I just love these, and I have no intention of ever letting these go. You know, I've let go of a lot of things over the years. I used to have a bunch of fucking Asterix comics and shit like that. I don't give a crap about any of it. But these are really special and close to my heart, too, you know. The Young Crumb Story. And there's the signature at the bottom there. Yeah, that Bestial Devastation. You know, it pisses me. I wish they would just release Bestial Devastation by itself. I really kind of hate it that there are always bonus tracks on Morbid Visions, you know, because at the end of the full LP, it's like you've already listened to a full LP, and now there's like all this extra shit on the end. It's like, release it in its own right, man. Treat it like the separate work of art that it is, you know. So cool. All right, well, listen, one and all, I'm gonna hang it up because I'm kind of fading. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, quarter after almost. But I've been streaming almost 2 hours. Am I cranky, Bobby Gas? Bobby Gas telling you about cranky. Is that right? You know, thanks, Autumn. Makes my day to hear that. Yeah, I think I'm gonna do 20 questions for 2020, or is it 2021? 2020 pretty soon. So I have to think of a record that I have that Bobby Gas would like that I don't like. So yeah, we'll get to that. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out Bip Bop Boom's channel. All right. Thank you, one and all. Really appreciate hearing from all of you. Seriously. So thanks. It's fun to do these like long, just sort of impromptu streams because y'all make it fun. So thank you. And by the way, if you're not from the South, y'all is a really useful expression. So cool. All right. How the fuck do I stop this? Oh, here we go. All right. Take care, everyone, man. Thanks again.